Good morning, everyone. Good to see you all. Happy to give this presentation and the presentation itself. Product first and foremost versus the accidental product. Now, this is a little bit of a setup pitch. You're going to hear a lot of great talks today about raising venture capital, about testing your product market fit, about getting out there, sales channels, accelerators, and so on. So what this does is, in my view, set up kind of where the ecosystem is in a lot of developing economies, developing countries, those that have a nascent ecosystem and are trying to build on that to get to the next step. So really what I've seen around Eastern Europe, the Near East, places like that, is companies tend to start off as outsourcing companies, doing contract work for hire. That's all great, and we'll talk a little bit about how that ecosystem progresses, what the economics of it are. And then many times, people in those companies try to go off and find product opportunities, and that transition is a difficult one. Oops, this is harder than I thought. So we'll step through what that transition looks like and a little bit of what I would recommend companies look for as they're going through that transition. So really, a lot of it is about planning and prep work and making your way towards trying to build a great company. Next. So starting in the outsourcing business, relatively straightforward. If you have a team of good engineers, there are low capital requirements. Really, you need an office, or in many cases, not even an office, where you can work virtually. Bring on great engineers, and then trying to find customers on contract projects, generate revenue, and so your cash flow requirements are much lower than what you typically see with a product-oriented company. So project by project by project, larger by larger by larger, the companies end up growing. And you develop new business, but also have repeat business with existing customers. And this is a typical curve of what you'd see in the contracting or outsourcing world. A lot of countries are doing this. Of course, the most famous case is India back in the 1990s and early 2000s, certainly grown to a large economy, both from software outsourcing, but they are now focused to a large extent on business process outsourcing, which is processing credit cards and doing call centers and things along those lines. Russia, China, Canada has all gotten into the act. I do a lot of work with Canada. I was the Canadian Trade Commissioner for Silicon Valley for 3 years and saw them move largely from an outsourcing economy, and they're doing quite a bit of product work. Pakistan, Ukraine, Spain are all strong and known outsourcing economies, and then Armenia, I work with them quite a bit and now helping them with the transition over to product base. And Poland makes the list, of course. So from an outsourcing perspective, maximum revenue per year is based upon your capacity to take on projects. Capacity to take on projects is limited by the number of engineers that you actually have under contract. So from an outsourcing perspective, generally the organizations look like this, where you have a CEO, admin, sales, and you have a whole team of engineers. And eventually, as you grow bigger, it would be a project manager and engineers under that. But if you want to add more revenue, you just simply add engineers to the mix. Now, eventually, that becomes problematic, because with engineers comes administration and overhead, and your capacity to grow becomes diminished. The problem with this, it makes it for a great business, it pays the bills, you're hiring engineers, you're growing the economy, but it doesn't necessarily scale. Scaling going the opposite direction in terms of shape of the curve. Now, what investors are looking for around the world are scalable businesses. So it's difficult to try to find investment in these scenarios, just simply cash flow and generating greater and greater cash flow as you go on. So let me give you an example, made-up one, Acme Industries. So this is a medium-sized work-for-hire software firm with good engineering talent, in some cases great, a few superstars. Average project size is around 20,000. This is typically what I've seen. Sometimes you have ones that are much larger, but for the most part, it's piecework, and you're taking on things one at a time. Engineers are strong. I mean, there's great engineering talent, certainly spread throughout Eastern Europe and the Near East as well. So let's step through the life story of Acme Industries. So their first couple of projects, they started off with a custom telecom project. Great, performed well. They got a good reputation in the industry and have started to branch out. Second project in the datacom world, related, but not necessarily identical, brand new set of customers and going. Related to that is security. Why not take on a security project? Now we have to hire additional engineers, we have to hire people with different sets of expertise and move them on to the next step. More projects still. So here's a custom CRM, customer relations management system, which is used for sales automation for the most part. Brand new project, also successful, and so they're able to get a second one under that with a different company, different contractor. Now wait, so what happens here? We have some commonality. So the thought becomes, why not take this expertise and grow it into a product-based business? Why can't we take this and spin it off and start to do our own things? So we have common requirements. Let's become a product company. We're going to have paying customers. Our development is leveraged. In other words, we start to look like a product company where we can develop once and sell to many individual companies. We can use our existing code. We can multiply and go. And this happens all the time. So as you start to see some commonality, why not take that to the next step? Well, there's issues wrong with it. And for the most part, what I call this is an accidental product. You've backed into it. Because you've found customers with some common requirements, that does not a business make in and of itself. Why? Because there's all kinds of issues that a product company should step through first. Is this a large market? What does the competition look like in that market? What are the customer needs? Just beyond those two, so you have a coincidence with two, but does that spread? Does that leverage? What are the support requirements? You're in a product-oriented outsourcing, project-oriented outsourcing company. But when you build a product, there's all kinds of support requirements, but particularly, and this is always underestimated, there's marketing and sales needed. Marketing to develop the overall structure of what that company is going to look like to build and support and sustain and regenerate new products, and also sales. So you might be able to sell within the local economy, but spreading beyond that becomes problematic. A product-based business works on leverage again. So it's develop once and sell many. So you start with a fundamental unmet need in the marketplace. What is that drawing need? Again, if you're starting with just simply a coincidence between two existing customers, you may not have a sense for what that pain is that you're trying to fill within the marketplace itself. And you also don't necessarily know how large that market is and what the competitive space looks like. So there's quite a bit of homework that happens with a product-based company, and we'll cover some of those techniques throughout the day. In addition, risk capital is typically required to go ahead and develop and deliver products or services. So typical cash flow for a product-based company looks like this. This is the famous valley of death, as people call it. So what happens is you start off on the negative. You spend money on your engineers, you spend money on your marketing sets of talent to go ahead and try to make sure that you're building the right thing. Then over time, as you get that product out into market, you're spending additional funds on marketing and sales and trying to push that out before you start to turn that corner and start to get out there. So this valley of death repeats itself over and over within product-based companies, and this is why people need risk capital, venture funding, to go off and make this happen. Oops. And functionally, a product company looks a lot different. So it starts off with more of a functional organization as opposed to the broad-based, engineering-based organization we saw earlier. So what you have is a CEO supported by staff and then separate departments for sales, for marketing, for engineering, which is just a portion of the company. And if you take a look at typical financial statements, the engineering portion of a company like this ends up being anywhere between 15 and 40%, depending. So it's the minority of the company, not the majority. Operations, finance, other staff functions, depends on the product as to how this is going to look. So this is an organization that can grow and can scale and can support multiple products and multiple revenue streams. So when you're thinking about starting a product company, there's a whole series of homework. Now this is kind of a famous Silicon Valley diagram. I call it the Steve Blank methodology. Other people call it the 4 steps to the Epiphany. And these are the actual steps that a product company could and should go through as you're starting to develop things. First one being customer discovery. Customer discovery assumes you're guessing about what the unmet need is, and you're running a series of tests against that unmet need. The book Lean Startup is a whole series of descriptions about exactly how you go about running those steps, building and running those experiments, and learning from them. The whole purpose of customer discovery is to get yourself to a minimum viable product. So at this point, you've actually put something in customers' hands that they can go off and trial and demo and take to the next step. Where I see most companies fall down in the transition from a custom outsourcing company into a product company is the next step, customer validation. Customer validation starts with a minimum viable product. And by the way, if you have two customers on an outsourcing side that have a CRM system, you have what might be considered a minimum viable product at that point. The next step is to determine whether you now have a repeatable sales process, whether there's a market need that can grow simply beyond those individuals that you've already contracted with onto a much larger scale, and hopefully onto a global scale. So if this is going to work for you, if you've gone ahead and developed a minimum viable product, and you've gone ahead and validated the fact that there is a marketplace, and you have a repeatable sales process, then it's time to go all in. This is the poker chips going right to the pot, and why not do it? Well, there's problems with this transition. First being management distraction. Management is a rare commodity in many of these companies, and you don't necessarily want to spread it amongst too many activities. So running both an outsourcing company as well as a product company becomes very problematic. Your business needs your focus, and being split into two divides your focus in half. Second, if you have the same company doing both contract work and product work, usually it's the product guys that consider themselves the rock stars, the chosen ones, the ones that are going to move the company to the next step. So in these scenarios, you often have, if they're in the same building, a cultural rift between those two groups. And that can often kill productivity on both sides. Third is cash flow. So the cash flow diagrams, or just simply the way the money comes through, is different for those two types of businesses. So you have a custom outsourcing business which has, generates cash, it spins off cash, can be used to fund the product company, but again, you're going to be running negative for some time. How much cash versus how much is required to go ahead and make this transition is something that's very tricky to manage. So unprepared startup companies often get stuck in what's called the chasm. I'm throwing a lot of Silicon Valley metaphors here, pardon me for that. But crossing the chasm basically means you've got some early customers, you're working with them, you're maybe generating some revenue, but then turning around and making this product massive scale and growing at a global level is quite difficult. So this is the time at which you need marketing and sales expertise. This is the time in which you need real people to go off and help make that transition. So I advocate forming a spinoff and actually taking a knife and splitting the company into two parts. So you have your contract company, which is still running effectively. You've got great customers, you're generating cash, it's moving on. You use those resources to go ahead and start a brand new product company. Possibly name it something different, move it into a separate building, so on. You handpick management. When you take a knife to that company, you do it one time, you do it surgically. You take that some management, you move it over. You take some funding, the cash that's being spun off, and fund that company, and you move the IP that's used for that CRM product, that brand new product, over to the new entity. You also seek outside investors as well. I'll talk about that in a sec. But the contract company acts like an individual investor. So it takes shares, if it's possible, into the new company. It contributes management talent and so on. The outside investors are treated the same way. Outside investors, so you're going to hear a lot today about fundraising and how to prepare yourself to go off to talk to VCs, talk to angels, and so on. You're going to hear a lot about accelerators and how to join and how to pick the right accelerator, join the right accelerator, and to take advantage of the resources that they have. All of those outside resources are things that can and will make your product company a great one. So a little bit of homework. When you're making this transition, or even before, do your projections. A lot of this stuff, as I mentioned, cash is king, cash flow becomes difficult, and cash flow can kill one or both of those two companies. So do your projections, and do them in some detail, and get outside help to do that. As engineers, most of us aren't always comfortable predicting the future and making guesses as to what's going on without real data. Well, you can do that. You can draw the curves, and you can make some assumptions as to how well you're going to be able to manage a business with a range of assumptions going on. Recommend that you file as a Delaware C Corporation. Not that you have to be based in the United States, but this is the global standard for corporations everywhere. As a standalone product company, especially due to liability issues, you should establish yourself as a company from the US. Not British Virgin Islands, not the Caymans, not anything sort of that might be seen as a tax haven. By establishing yourself as a Delaware C Corporation, you're able to attract investors on a broader scale. This is the norm. This is what we expect. This is vanilla. It's all very generic. It's okay to operate out of your home country as long as it makes sense. Here you benefit from lower labor costs, you benefit from stability, and so on. If you do eventually want to seek US investment, there probably should be at least a portion of the company that operates out of the US, hopefully somebody with decision-making power. And there'll be some discussions on that later today. You should also talk with an attorney about IP considerations, or intellectual property, that was used to develop those initial 2 CRM products for those companies under contract. So you'll have to own at least some portion of that intellectual property that was generated during those projects, or you'll have to independently develop it, and you'll have to decide where that intellectual property resides on paper. So does it reside here, or does it reside in the US, or both? And that has both legal and tax ramifications. So then you go off and build a great product team. Well, the team itself is multivariate. So you are just simply a portion of the team. As soon as you seek investors, which are part, and you want smart money, not dumb money, you'll hear that several times today, they put together a board of directors. The board of directors is your day-to-day management that makes the large decisions on how the company is structured, where the financing comes from, so on and so forth, and they meet on a regular basis. They are your boss. As soon as you take outside investment, the board can hire and fire you as the CEO of this product company. You may or may not have co-founders. I personally am not necessarily in favor of co-founders, because the discourse that often happens between co-founders is something that is a risk and can blow up a company. So for me, at least, I prefer to see companies with a single CEO and then executives underneath, which are the technical executives, the marketing and sales executives. But there's different schools of thought on that. But be aware that in many cases, if you don't do this properly, it can become a source of friction. Put together a board of advisors. So board of advisors are those individual experts in different fields, experts that have talent and skills that you may not have, and so you can seek their advice. And if you build a strong board of advisors, you will look that much stronger to a potential investor. Executive staff, obviously you build that yourself, considered part of the team normally. And also, for us, service providers. So it's the lawyers, it's the accountants, it's the recruiters, it's the PR people. They're part of your team. And if you choose strong partners in this regard, they can help build your business, they can help you seek investors, they can help steer the company in a proper direction, again, to become more global. So as part of your homework, again, build a full company timeline. Figure out exactly what you're going to do when you're starting, when your MVP is out, get your alliances, have some idea when your prototype and production is going to hit, and some goals in terms of user adoption. Along with that, you can see at the top, there's some idea of when you would need initial and further financing rounds and how large those rounds will be. You'll be able to generate those as a result of your overall income statement cash flow. And then how many employees. So with this, an investor can get a quick snapshot of not only where you are now, but what it looks like in the future. Build a global sales strategy. So initially, you're selling to those 2 customers that help you develop that CRM system. You want to spread it out. Most companies start local because you have these are the people that you know. There's language, there's common cultural issues, and so on. But eventually, you want to be able to grow what you're doing regionally, say within Europe, and then globally to beyond the boundaries here. Build a strong financial team. Cash flow is king. So initially, you can do this with a CPA or part-time bookkeeper. It moves on to a controller and initially a CFO, a chief financial officer. Not something you need to do right away, but these are the people that will help you with your financial strategies. So basically, you're putting your systems in place to try to grow at a global level. Your engineering, choose the right people, your marketing. There's different messages for each geography. I'll talk in the next portion of the talk about geographical differences, which I find very interesting. Sales, think global. In your operations, be mindful of cost. You can put operation, if you have a product, a physical product, you can put manufacturing in the places that make most sense for you. So on the global cultural side, I think this is pretty interesting. There's a gentleman by the name of Richard Lewis, who in the 1950s and 60s developed the Lewis model of cross-cultural communication. So it basically divides up in the world into 3 orientations as to how people behave. So we have the linear active, which is the cool, the factual, the decisive planning type. Multi-active are warm and emotional and vent and talk a lot and so on. Very impulsive, loquacious is the word that they use. And they're reactive, which is more courteous and will listen to you. A few words mean a whole lot. Contextual meaning is important. So this guy, Richard Lewis, who speaks 10 languages. He founded the Berlitz School. So before there was Rosetta Stone and these other language tools, most people learned from the Berlitz books. So he divided this up. And again, I apologize, I don't know if you can see this. And do I have a laser pointer? I do indeed. So the 2 things I wanted to point out. So this is the multi-active area. So you've got the Italians and the Spanish and the Latin Americans, sort of hot-blooded and impetuous, if you will. Over here, you have largely Asian cultures, which are reactive and much more sedate and will listen to what you have to say, contemplate it, and then come back to you. And down here, we have the linear active, which are the US, Germans, the Swiss, the Brits, and so on. And interesting enough, Poland's right in between. So I think we'll learn a lot more today, at least the speakers will, about Polish culture and how we're going to interact with you. But this is a good way of sort of thinking yourself when you grow on a global stage, what cultures are you dealing with and how do you act with these people? So from a map standpoint, you can see this. And look it up, please, the Richard Lewis or Lewis model of cross-cultural communication. So what this really means, and the reason I even bring it up is because selling internationally is different depending on where you go. So just by contrast, a lot of these places work with family and trust, and it's those long-term relationships that go. So even if you're a poor supplier, if you have family relationships or you've built up something over a long period of time, they may still do business with you. But contrasting that, in the US, it's largely a meritocracy. So we will sit down with you and compare what you have versus others and make the best decision, not on external factors, but on the factors that you speak about directly at that one point in time. So it's pretty interesting. Just one side thought, too, on dealing with US, you know, about somewhere between 70 and 80% of all the CEOs in Silicon Valley are foreign-born. We're used to people coming in with accents, not necessarily knowing the language as well, and so on. That's fine. We're used to it. So you can come in, you know, with some courage and go ahead and, as long as you have a good product or value proposition, you can sell in the U.S. fairly well. What we don't necessarily tolerate, it's kind of funny, is the written word. So in many cases, your brochures, your presentations, all your sales material, everything has to be in precise English. So I highly recommend an native English speaker go through everything. And when I work with international companies, I spend a lot of time proofreading. It becomes an essential skill. Not my favorite, but it goes on. Contrast that versus Japanese. Japanese, very formal. It's the dance of the 7 meetings. So it takes at least 7 meetings. You present your business card first off. It's a gift that you present. It's very humbling when you receive one. And you have to go off and then start to develop a relationship with the person or persons that you're dealing with, step by step by step. Usually you don't talk product until about meeting 3, you don't talk price until meeting 4 or 5, and eventually, if you've done a good job of working in a relationship, you can move toward concluding business with them. And trust me, unless you screw it up, that will be a long-lasting relationship. So as you get going on a global level, understand the cultures and exactly what's required, because everybody's going to be a little bit different. So, my conclusion, if you're going to do this, start to think like a product company from day one. You have to sort of put aside all the businesses that you're working with on the outsourcing side, find out what your unmet need is, find out whether this is a large market, figure out how much capital is required, where the sources of capital come from, who your partners are going to be, and so on. What sort of personnel, people, customers you're going to have. Be mindful of cultures and attitude, and definitely go global from the start. So when you do, don't build yourself on a bad foundation, build on a strong one, project yourself forward, and off you go. So please don't build a castle full of sand, build something rock solid, and off you go. Cool. Thank you very much.